Hey there, fisionados. Kevin here from N.O.A.H, Northern Ontario Aquarium Hobby. Just here to talk to you today about a little product review that I'm going to do. Haven't done a product review yet, but this is going to be my first, and this is a super exciting one. I'm very happy about this. Today I'm going to be covering the Apogee Instruments SQ-520 PAR sensor, PAR meter, sorry. So what this is a full spectrum quantum sensor. It's a tiny little thing, but there's a few different models here. I'm going to be talking about the one that I have. Like I said, the SQ-520. Some of you might be familiar with the MQ-510, but this is one of their newest ones, and I'm super happy about this one. So I'm going to sort of dive right in and start giving you a bit of a rundown. I'm not going to do a full demonstration of this product right now, maybe a quick one, but another video I'm going to get into the full explanation of PAR measurements and everything like that. But this is really just, I wanted to spend the time to talk about this particular piece of hardware. This is a wonderful little thing. I needed a PAR meter. I got to talking to the guys there, which again, amazing customer service at Apogee. They answered all my questions, and I had great email contact with them back and forth. But so I really want to take the time to talk about this today. And I guess we'll start off really about covering the importance of PAR meters and understanding that in our planted aquariums, which comes down to just understanding our lighting in our aquariums. You hear people talking about a high light tank or a low light tank. This is how we can actually determine this. And again, I love this product here. So I'm gonna just stop gushing just for the moment, even though I'll probably gush all the way through this thing, and I'll tell you a little bit about this unit. So before I get talking about the unit itself, I just wanted to go over quickly with some of you, like I said, a sort of crash course in understanding PAR and measuring our lights. I mean, obviously, when we're dealing with a planted tank, we've got our plants growing in here, and we've got our lights. Now, you could be doing CO2 injection, and you could be doing heavy fertilizer dosing. Those things all have their benefits, and I talk about them in other videos. But, of course, the two things that you absolutely need to have a planted tank as the absolute base, aside from your plants and substrate, obviously, is you got your water and you got your lights. And it's the interplay between those two that allow our plants to grow. I mean, very basically, photosynthesis, plants convert, the light energy coming down to fuel their growth. Essentially, it creates a fuel of carbohydrate sugars that are synthesized from CO2 and H2O from water. Photosynthesis, right? Photo meaning light, synthesizing meaning the synthesizing of those carbohydrate sugars that allow our plants to grow from CO2 and water. CO2 obviously part of the photosynthesis process. As we all know this, the plants take in carbon dioxide and put out oxygen, and then in the night cycle, again, they're putting out CO2 and taking in oxygen. Now, throughout the different changes in the hobby, and as the planted tank hobby grew, and people tried to determine, well, what's the best way to light our plants? Not specifically the best bulbs, but how do we calculate? Is this a high light or a low light? And there was, unfortunately, sort of a kind of a general rule going around for years, watts per gallon, and people used that as a rule of thumb. However, it doesn't make sense. It never really made sense. Essentially, it can be used as a really vague guideline, but I'm talking really vague, because watts is the amount of energy needed to power a certain light bulb. Right, so if you talk about how many watts per gallon, it didn't make sense because, different tanks are different sizes, different depths, different lengths. So a watt of energy going into a light bulb in no way can be calculated over any sort of space, right? It didn't make sense. Watts is energy to power your light bulbs. Another thing that people would look at then was lumens, per gallon, or lumens per liter. Now, certain number of watts bulb will put out a certain number of lumens of brightness, and essentially that's all that lumens is. Lumens is how bright we see the light, and again, that doesn't really tell us much aside from something that's got high lumens looks brighter to us, but it doesn't actually discuss in any way how that light at the source, because lumens are always calculated at the bulb, at the source. It doesn't discuss, well, what happens when we start looking at depth, what happens when we start looking at width away, a distance away from that light. So the only two measures that we can actually use when looking at how to grow your planted tank and how to accurately gauge the light is PAR and spectrum. There was one other thing that a lot of people used to consider. But yes, the other thing that people talk about is Kelvin. I've got a 6500 Kelvin bulb. Look for a bulb that's got this. Now, 6500 Kelvin is typically what's considered daylight bulb, and all that Kelvin is again how the coloration of the light, how it appears to our eyes. It doesn't in any way dictate the spectrum. As a very, very vague rule, again, a lot of the 6500K commercially bought, like just bulbs for our house, have a middling to okay spectrum that can be used in a low-tech situation, but again, it's not determinate at all, because when we're looking at the spectrum, we need to look at something that has peaks in the blues, the reds, and the greens. Again, I'm not going to get too deeply into that right now because that's for another video, but how the light appears to our eyes as measured in Kelvin is not necessarily indicative of the spectrum necessary for plant development, chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B, and full photosynthesis. So again, to go back to it, really the only two measurements that we can work with is spectrum, but in order to measure spectrum, you need to get a spectrometer, and spectrometers are quite expensive. They're going to be a few $1,000s to get in. It's not something we typically will have at home in our hobby, nor is it something that we can easily sort of attain in our neighborhood specifically. So we do rely on the manufacturer's data to give us the spectrum of their lights. Now, a lot of aquarium branded lights will list at least the spectrum values, and so that gives us something to work with. But again, we'll talk about that a bit further in another video. So that brings us down to PAR. Now, PAR is not a measure, a unit of measurement. So you can't come out and say, oh, well, this light is 50 PAR. That's not the way it works, and we're going to find out why in just a few minutes. So that leaves us again with PAR. Now, PAR is short for, or an acronym for, photosynthetically active radiation. It's measured in micromoles. Now, here's a little bit of the science. Again, I'm not going to go too deep into it, but just at least for the understanding of what we're looking at here. Light is measured in micromoles. Micromole is a measure of the number of photons. Now, a photon essentially is the force carrier from electromagnetic radiation. Light. The electromagnetic radiation in the form of light, so photon is, the thing that's firing down there and creating light. Let's just keep it as sort of a very basic general term. Now, there's probably going to be some people out there that are just screaming, pulling their hair out right now, and how simple of an explanation that is, but let's keep it that. Photon is light. Micromoles is the measurement of the number of photons. Now, micromoles are actually, I believe it's 602 quadrillion photons of light energy. So that's 602 with 15 zeros after. It's a lot. So obviously it's something that we need special instrumentation to measure. So again, when we're talking about photosynthetically active radiation, in terms of PAR, it's measured in micromoles. Now, the spectrum that we tend to view between is between 400 and 700 angstroms. I'm not going to get into explaining angstroms or anything like that right now, but when we're looking at the spectrum of light that is necessary for photosynthesis to occur, you know, from this point, 400 to 700 angstroms is the spot where our spectrum falls in between. So what we're doing is we're measuring, when we're looking at PAR, the amount of micromoles per second over a specific distance. And I'll get into that. So because there's a few ways that people will measure it. One of them, I believe, is the most correct way, but we don't break it down so much into these, but just so you understand what we're talking about here, before I get into talking about this light and this quantum meter and why it's so important for us understanding PAR and why we can't just say, I have a PAR of X. Just doesn't work that way. Okay, so two of the ways that PAR is sometimes looked at and measured is PPF, which is photosynthetic photon flux. Essentially, it's measuring the number of micromoles per second. You know, so it's measuring how many micromoles, again related to photons, per second is reaching the sensor. Typically, this can only really be used again at source, right at the light bulb, because it doesn't account for distance from the source of light. So it's not as effective of use of measure when we're looking at PAR, because light, the inverse square law dictates the number of photons hitting area declines as distance increases. Basically, light gets dimmer the further away from the source you get. Common knowledge, but at least that's sort of the concept behind it. And so that's why understanding micromoles per second over a certain distance, and so that's when we get into PPFD. So PPFD is photosynthetic photon flux density, which is micromoles over a meter squared per second. Sorry, micromoles per meter squared per second. Whew, that's a lot of it. But essentially what we're saying is it's measuring the number of micromoles over a specific area over a certain amount of time. And there's a whole calculation. Again, I won't get that deep into that right now. So, I mean, already you're starting to get a headache thinking about some of that detailed science. So that's why we need a PAR meter, because a PAR meter will measure PPFD. So it will measure micromoles over the distance over time, as dictated, you know, as I said, per meter squared per second. I might not have to do another video covering this stuff, because I seem to be covering it now, although I will go over this stuff again when I talk about how that's actually important to photosynthesis. Right now, let's just take it as written. It's important to photosynthesis, understanding, you know, how much light we have, what's considered high light, what's considered low light. Now, in order to measure that, right, obviously we have to look at our source, and then we move down to, say, the top of our plants, and then we move down to our substrate level but then we can look at the top of our plants a little bit further away from the main source, right? Because our lights only have a certain spread of light. Now, as we said, because light intensity decreases the further away you get from the source, that means there's going to be a different intensity of light up here at the surface than there is down here. And that's very important to know when we're dealing with certain plants, you know, because if there's not as much light down here as there is up here, we have to take into consideration which plants can grow in which sort of light. Now, if you don't want light to be your limiting factor, you bring up your lights so that there is enough light covering your entire tank. Now, again, of course, light will be less down here than it is up here, the amount of light penetrating, and water, of course, plays a big factor in that, causing, you know, there's reflection and refraction. Turbidity in the water, so particles and everything like that, will also slow down light penetration as well, and that's something to consider. Now, in most cases, our tanks are fairly clean or fairly clear from those floating particulates, so it doesn't come into play quite as much as, say, measuring it in wild. And so that's where this little beauty comes in. Like I said, this is the SQ-520 full spectrum quantum sensor. I'm going to put a link to Apogee's site, obviously, because they can explain it quite well, but pretty much what's going on is if I understand correctly, there's the sensor underneath this cap here. It's absorbing light, it's breaking down into the respective spectrums and absorbing all the information and telling us how many micromoles per meter squared per second are being absorbed by this sensor, and so how many how much is coming off light. So as we move our distance, it takes obviously different measurements. Now, before I get into like a brief demonstration of this, the reason that I love this particular model so much, after looking at the other one, like I said, so this will work for fluorescent, for incandescent, daylight, and LEDs. The older model was not good for LEDs at all. It couldn't account for it. However, this unit does. But also the MQ-510 had a data logger, a little handheld unit attached to it that would give you your real-time measurements and log your data. This, however, is a USB connection. So you can plug this into your computer and get real-time measurements, or as long as you've got this connected to a power source, similar to the thing that you would use to plug your cell phone into to charge that, as long as you've got that connected into a power source, this will take field data for you. It's not going to give you real-time viewing that you can see right there in your hand when you do it in that way, but it can store up to 10,000 measurements. So you take it down, you measure your tank, and I mean, this is a 4 meter long cable. You know, you're going to be able to run this all over your fish room. If you have a particularly big fish room, well, you plug it from one place to another and there you go. Or if you've got a Windows-based tablet, has to be Windows-based, doesn't work with Chrome or Apple at the moment, but if you've got a Windows-based tablet, you can plug this into that to get your real-time measurements as you go. Otherwise, you do what I do, and you take this, you take your field measurements, and you bring this and you plug it into your computer, and it will download that data log for you so you can take a look at your measurements. I feel that there's more flexibility for me in this, especially because, according to Apogee, coming up sometime this year, there's going to be a Bluetooth attachment to this, so we'll be able to run these off of our smartphones. So again, that's absolutely amazing. Plugging this into a Bluetooth adapter, it will then send information to our smartphones to be able to get real-time data logging. It will be extremely portable and just so convenient to use, because this is fully submersible. You can measure dry, you can measure wet. I'm so impressed with this. Amazing value for something like this too. This typically retails at around $350 US. Now, for some of us, you might go, oh, 350 bucks, that's a lot. But think of how much you spend on a canister, filter. Think of how much we spend on some of our plants and our ferts and our chemicals and everything like that. How much we're going to spend on our light array. Having something where we can actually measure the effectiveness of that light and where to set it to properly dial in our lights for the plants in our tank. To me, $350 is nothing. Versus the SQ-520, the older version, which retailed around $500, so it was a little bit more. So this is an amazing value for that price, because you're able to get real-time or data-logged PAR measurements for the amount that we would pay for a light system. And I mean, if you're someone who has just one tank on the go, you may just take the one set of measurements for your one setup and leave it at that, and you may never need it again. But really, how many of us set up one tank, one scape, and leave it like that? It's unheard of. We either get multiple tanks with multiple dimensions, different plants, or we're constantly rescaping, after a while. And so after 2 scapes, I'd say that this baby is paid for itself. After 1 scape, if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty of it, it absolutely has. Now, do you need this? No, you don't need it, but man, you really should have it. If you really want to get into seriously understanding like the light that's being used in your tanks, whether it's low tech or high tech, so helpful, so helpful. I never like saying run out and get a certain piece of expensive technology. There's always ways around it. And yes, you can do without it, but you're just not going to have the same level of control and understanding of what you're doing with your lighting, which is a major part of our plant growth. Like I said, break it down to the bare basics: plants, water, light. That's the very basics of what we need in a planted tank. So something that will help you to understand and fully grow, to me this is as important as a water testing kit, understanding what your pH and your GH, KH, nitrates, nitrites and all that is. This is as important because it allows you to dial in one of your main components. And if you're like me, planted tanks typically aren't the only plants that you keep. You'll have plants in your house. I've got an immersed nursery as well as a submerged nursery for growing aquatic plants. I've got some in-home like countertop herb gardens and plants growing. This can toggle between water and air mode. So this isn't exclusively just for the aquarium hobby. This is for measuring all light, that's necessary for photosynthesis. And again, so that's another added bonus. This is something that you can use in every part of the plant growing hobby, whether it's aquatic gardening or regular indoor gardening, hydroponic setups, more recreational plant growing, food-based gardens and such. Just so darn useful. Again, for 350 bucks, that's amazing. And the cool thing is that the spectral response that this unit gets is as good as others from other companies that are costing more. So again, value for the dollar. Apogee, way to go, because we do spend so much money in this hobby. To have something so handy and so useful at such a great price. I mean, again, it sounds like I'm trying to sell it to you, like I'm doing a home shopping network. I'm just so thoroughly impressed with this. I've had this for a little while, I've fiddled around with it, and I absolutely love this, and I don't know what I did without it before. If you can't justify $350 yourself, maybe your aquarium club in town, or you and a few friends who are interested would get together and buy one, and sort of pass it around and use it. because it's so damn useful. So folks, I hope you found this informative. And again, all the details are going to be below, at least you know, the link to Apogee instruments and the specific model. I cannot recommend this enough. I've gushed throughout this whole video. Special thanks go to the guys at Apogee, you know, for being so helpful, and I hope that all of you have a chance to see how helpful they are. The SQ-520, go out and buy it, again, because it's, right now it's what I would say is future ready. You know, there's the Bluetooth capabilities going to be coming out sometime in this year. You know, they're working on that right now. Hopefully sometime this year, you know, keep at it, guys. You're some big brains, you know, and some cool people. So I've got faith in you. You know, get that product out there, because then it's the expandability and the usefulness of the product is just going to open up so much. So really, this unit here, in my opinion, is the future of their product right now. You know, they'll keep on innovating, I'm sure, and keep on developing and keep on providing amazing instruments at great value. But again, go out and get yourself one of these if you really want to take a serious look at your lighting. But so again, I hope you enjoyed this video. Plenty more to come. Sorry, it's been a little bit since I did a video, you know, but I've had a lot of sort of builds on the go. I was, you know, helping some other folks, getting my stuff set up as well. So I'm back, and hopefully, you know, a little bit more full swing. I know I've got some more design elements coming up, some more foundations of aquascaping. Keep hitting subscribe down there, keep sharing, keep commenting. The channel's growing, I love that. Again, keep commenting, you know, hit me up on the forums, hit me up in the message board down below. I love getting feedback, and I love trying to help out as best as that I can. So again, just enjoy the hobby, you know, just soak it in. Spring is in the air around my parts, you know, and stuff is starting to turn green out there. And this green has sustained me all through winter, and it's seeing the growth outside has inspired me to grow even more inside this year. So, you know, just dive right in.